In today's show, we're talking about wildlife photography using higher ISOs and what we can do to combat some of the grain and noise. We're also going to be taking a look at 4 editing programs that are meant to reduce the noise in your wildlife images so that we can create cleaner, more beautiful images. Hey everyone, welcome into Magnolia Photography SC. I'm Jeff House, and I'm a wildlife photographer in Charleston, South Carolina. So today we're talking about ISO. We all know that the amount of light that we have when photographing wildlife photography can often be one of the biggest challenges that we face as wildlife photographers. There's no question about it. We might be photographing in the early morning or the early evening when the sun angles are much lower. Now, of course, we get some beautiful light, right? We get the better sun angles. We get a light that's more, that's softer, more flattering. And of course, some of the lighting can have some beautiful color tones to it, some of those oranges and reddish kind of colors, right? And it just looks absolutely beautiful on whatever we're photographing. But the lack of light, again, is where the real issue comes into play for us as wildlife photographers. And how do we use those faster shutter speeds so that we can freeze action, but we don't want to create these images that are awful, that are filled with noise and filled with grain, and they just look horrendous? Well, not everyone can afford that fancy new $6,000 camera that handles low light performance better than any other camera in the world, right? So we have to kind of make do with the equipment that we have. And there are some ways that we can reduce the effects of noise in our images while using higher ISOs. And I want to talk about that very quickly today before we take a look at 4 programs designed to help reduce noise. Now, we're going to jump into Lightroom Classic so that we can take a look at a real life example of some photos that I took. One, they're both using the same ISO, but one was taken using a very fast shutter speed that would typically be used for freezing action, and the other one was used at a very slow shutter speed that is really more appropriate when photographing a static subject. Now, that being said, I want to preface this by saying this technique does not work if we are photographing very quick moving animals or a flying bird or whatever the case may be, something running. This is not the technique to use. This is for photographing animals that are either completely static or have minimal movement. And it's also going to require that you have some sort of supportive device, a monopod or a tripod. Now, I very rarely use a tripod. And the reason for that is I don't like how cumbersome it is to move around with it. Now, if I'm doing video and also still photographs at the same time when I'm out doing wildlife photography, that is something that I do like to engage in from time to time, then I like the tripod, because when I'm doing video, I might want to do some movements with the camera to make it more creative, more cinematic in nature. And having that tripod and having that extra support is super, super handy. And it really helps to get steady footage that looks, really beautiful. But if I'm not doing video, then I am always on a monopod. And what I do is I use a monopod with those 3 little feet that come out at the bottom, because it gives a little extra support. If you need to let go of your monopod for just a second, shake the hands out, it allows you to do that. Now, I will caution you with one thing. If you're using a monopod like that, don't let it go. Don't put your camera on there and walk away from your monopod, because I promise you, it will crash to the ground and break your equipment. So just because it has some feet and it has some stability there, don't put a lot of trust into it, because it is not the most stable thing in the world, especially when we start putting those big, heavy wildlife lenses on our cameras. All right, with that out of the way, let's jump in to Lightroom Classic. Okay, guys, welcome into Lightroom Classic. Now, this is going to be very quick, very brief, but very to the point. I think how a lot of people view ISO when they're thinking about it is they kind of look at it as a very linear type thing. In other words, if I shoot at 200 ISO, I'm going to get extremely clean images. They're going to be beautiful. But if I shoot at 12,800 ISO, they're just going to be a complete mess. Well, there is some truth to that, right? There is some truth that when we increase our ISO, yes, we are going to introduce more noise and more grain into our images because we are increasing the sensitivity of our camera sensor when we raise that ISO. And it's that sensitivity and lack of light that creates the noise and grain. But you will notice that I just kind of pieced two things together, right? It's the sensitivity and the light aspect. Well, those two variables together combine to determine how much noise and grain you're going to have in your image. So if you're using 12,800 ISO and we're using a shutter speed of 1/2000, we're letting less light into the camera than if we're using a shutter speed of 12,800 and using a shutter speed of 1/200. 1/200 is a much slower shutter speed, but we are photographing here two static birds. I do not need to use a shutter speed that is meant to freeze action. That will only create less light coming into the camera, and that will create more shadows because of it creating naturally a little bit of a darker image. So I have bumped up the ISO on both of these images, or excuse me, I have bumped up the exposure on both of these images just so we can better see the effects of the noise levels. Now, sometimes the noise and these types of things, when you're trying to demonstrate these in a video, get a little bit lost in translation. The video tends to put a mask on some of the effects that we're talking about. But if we look at this image on the left, again, 12,800, 1/2000 of a second for the shutter speed. Pretty noisy image. Now we can still save it. We can still work with this. This isn't ridiculous. And when we run it through our noise programs, it's going to even reduce it further. And trust me, the image will come out beautiful. But the point here again is just looking at the difference of shutter speed at the same ISO between two images. Again, this one, same ISO, much slower shutter speed, more appropriate for a static animal. And you can see that we get far less grain in this image. You can just see the grain through here, right? It's just so much more than over here if we look in the darker areas of this photo, right? If we're looking at that rock, yeah, we can see grain. Of course, we're going to see grain at 12,800, but we don't see the same level of grain as over here because our shutter speed is so much slower for the bird on the right. So this is something that most photographers, especially newer photographers, they're not aware of how this works. They're not aware that by reducing the shutter speed, you can reduce some of the effects of noise and grain in your images. And as we can clearly see here, it does. So this is something that when you're out in the field and you got to use those higher ISOs, look at what your subject is doing. How quickly are they moving? Are they even moving at all? Don't think you need this really fast shutter speed to freeze their action. Slow it down to 1/200, 1/400, 1/500. If you're in those types of shutter speeds, you're going to reduce the effects of noise in your images when using those higher ISOs. So that is my little trick today. But again, it comes with that little caveat of make sure that you're using a monopod or tripod when using this, because it's just way too hard to take images at these slow shutter speeds with those big wildlife lenses and not get camera shake from hand holding your camera and lens. All right. With that being said, we're now going to take a look at an image in which I ran the same photo through 4 noise reduction programs. And the programs that we used are Topaz Photo AI, Lightroom Classic, On1 Noise, and Luminar Neo. Now this I wanted to add on to this video because a viewer recently commented on one of my videos, and they commented that they had been using On1 Noise for their noise reduction, and they felt that it was doing a better job than Topaz Photo AI, which you know I am a huge proponent of, and I am not sponsored by them. I have no affiliation with them whatsoever. This is just the program that I use because I believe in the results that it produces. Now, I do want to talk about On1 for a second because I am very familiar with this program. I actually used to use On1. Boy, it went way back to like 2014. And I was a newer photographer back then, and I was using it for a lot of their presets that they had when editing photos. And honestly, looking back, I stopped using it after a short time because I kind of developed my editing style a little bit more, and I kind of got into it and started creating my own looks for my photos. And so it was a little gimmicky at the time, but their effects were pretty good, I have to say. So if that's something that interests you, On1 might be worth checking out. They didn't have the best noise program back then, but quite honestly, no one really did because the technology just wasn't as prevalent as it is today. I tried On1, I don't know, about 3, 4, maybe 5 years ago again. I wanted to revisit it because I knew they had bumped up some of the noise software that they had. They bumped up some of the features and technology. So I wanted to give it a go. But one of the things that they were kind of dealing with back then were some issues with the program being very slow. And so I downloaded a trial. I wanted to give it a go. And that was my experience when I used the program. Their program was painfully slow, so painfully slow that I was like, yeah, there's just no way in hell that I would include this into my workflow because it's going to slow it up. So I was really pleased when I downloaded the trial just recently to do this little test here. It runs much faster. It works much better in the time that I've used it. So, kudos to them for improving that. But let's take a look. What I did here is I just made like a little grid of the same image. Obviously this was the same image taken, just one photo. It was a higher ISO. This was taken at 16,000 ISO. So this is really putting the ISO to the test and putting these programs to the test because 16,000 ISO is high. That is really high. So I wanted to kind of see what each one could do. Now, I will say this, I don't have it in this video, in this testing. Well, you know what? I'll wait till after we go through these before I share that with you. But let's take a look first at these 4 images. Topaz Photo AI, I just want to kind of go over something quickly. Topaz Photo AI, noise reduction is one of the big things that it's known for, right? That is kind of its wheelhouse, if you will. Lightroom Classic, they introduced AI denoise in their program. So their denoise program has come a long way, and there are a lot of great things about it. I don't think, personally, that it's up to the level of Topaz Photo AI or On1 noise at this point. But I do think they are getting closer and closer to that type of result. Now, of course, as they advance their technology, how will that relate to Topaz and On1 as they too advance their technology? Will there continue to be this little gap in the quality of the result, or will Lightroom Classic have a big jump and kind of catch up to these 2 programs? This is just how I see it. Again, this is my opinion. You have to use the programs on your own photos to see what you think and what you like, but I want to share my experience with you. And then Luminar AI. I was a little disappointed with the noise removal portion of their software, and I love Luminar AI. There are so many great features to Luminar AI that I would highly recommend making this part of your workflow, but for more specialty type things. But the noise reduction fell short, in my opinion. I was very disappointed with the result I got. Now, I am a Luminar Neo affiliate, and I will have some links in the show notes so that if you want to go to them and try out the software, there is no additional cost, no additional anything to you. You get everything for the same price. The only difference is that if you use that link, they will give me a small commission, which is just helpful for me to support me and the time and money that it takes to produce these videos every week. So if you do that, thank you very much. I appreciate that ahead of time. But again, I would say that looking at these 4 programs, when it comes to noise reduction, Luminar Neo, their Luminar AI noise software inside of Luminar Neo, it is out of the running for me because it just wasn't as effective. And I'm going to zoom in here a little bit on the corners of all 4 of these images so that we can kind of see the noise level. So again, Topaz is up here in the upper left. We got Lightroom Classic here. We got Luminar Neo here on the left. And then we've got On1 noise on the bottom right. And we can see the difference in the noise, right? Topaz and On1 both look pretty similar. Luminar Neo has a lot more noise still present in the image. Lightroom Classic still has a little bit of noise in the image, but it's been greatly reduced and obviously much better than Luminar Neo. So to me, that really brings it down to two programs, Topaz Photo AI and On1 Noise. Now, here's the thing. I did a couple tests with On1 Noise and different photos, and I used the same photos through Topaz Photo AI because Topaz Photo AI, as I keep saying, is my editing program of choice for noise and sharpening. There were several photos that I ran through both systems, both pieces of software, and I always liked the result from Topaz AI. There were a couple that went through the On1 software, and when they came back into Lightroom and I was comparing them, it was creating some sort of weird color shifts. So for instance, I had a photo of a bird on a log and there was some Spanish moss that was dangling from the tree in the background. Well, when the photo came out of Topaz AI, that still held the same color principles, same color tones that existed in real life with the Spanish moss. But in On1, it came back and it had some greenish and purplish color shifts inside of the Spanish moss, which of course made it look very unrealistic because it never had those colors in it to begin with. So I did notice that that happened a little bit. And I think we can even see, if we zoom in a little bit more here, even again, if we look at the bird here in Topaz compared to On1, I think we can see that there seems to be a little bit of an increase in the saturation of the bird's feathers with On1. Whereas with Topaz, this is the first step I do in the images, right? So no color correction has been applied to the image. So whatever we see, Topaz looks like how the image came out of camera. On1 is doing some sort of extra processing with the colors to give it this more saturated look. Now, that is something that for me personally, I don't care for. I don't want the program to be making those color adjustments because I want to do that in the program myself. Now, you might even recall on one of the videos that we did several episodes ago, one of the things that we could do inside Topaz AI was balance the color, right? And I didn't do that because it changed the image over to a TIFF from a DNG image. And you'll remember that conversation that we had about that. So we could do some color balancing and color effects in Topaz, but I feel like On1 might be doing this automatically and it's not really giving you the option as to how you want to handle the color aspect. And it's doing some processing to bump up the color tones in your images. I do think that On1, as far as the noise reduction and the sharpening, I feel it's really, really comparable to Topaz. And I think it does a great job at reducing the noise and at sharpening the image. There is just that one little thing with the color that is throwing me off a little bit and that I don't really care for. Now, I haven't worked with it a ton. I would be the first to admit that. I really downloaded it and ran maybe up to 10 images through it. I didn't see the color on every image, but I did see it on a lot of them. And so I don't think that the color here that's changed on the bird, I don't think that it's changed the color in any way that's detrimental to the photo or detrimental to the editing that we're going to be going through next. But I just don't like that it's taking upon it its own processing to do that, because it's not going to work in many cases, as I saw. It's going to start adding color shifts into the area of the photo that you don't want them, where it's not natural. It made the Spanish moss in that photo look very sci-fi like, and there was no fixing that. It was kind of baked into the photo. So there's no recovery for it. And even if there was, if it's going to be making those decisions and you're going to have to color correct that even further, now you're talking about more time in the editing process, and that's just not convenient. But what do you guys think if you look at these 4 photos next to each other? Definitely Topaz and On One have reduced the noise levels the best and have applied sharpening the best. Lightroom does a pretty good job with the sharpening, but again, the noise reduction is just a little bit behind that of Topaz and On One. And then Luminar, I just don't feel that it's really at the level right now where I would be using this for the heavier noise reductions that are required in wildlife photography. But what do you guys think? Do you guys have experience with each of these programs? Have you tried them out like this? What results did you get? Did you get anything different? Do you prefer one program over another? I would love to hear your thoughts. And also, go out, try using a slower shutter speed while using a higher ISO. See if you get cleaner, nicer looking images. I'm sure you will. Let me know how you make out. Let me know in the comments below. Would love to hear how you're progressing in your photography and some of these changes that we've been talking about over these episodes. And if you found this video helpful and you like it, please consider subscribing to the channel for more videos. If you would like the video, that helps me a lot in getting the video seen by more people. I just, again, really want to make this a community for helping people enjoy wildlife photography, get more enjoyment from it, and become better wildlife photographers. Hey, thanks so much for spending your time with me today. I look forward to seeing you guys in the next video. And until then, take care.